Hi folks, welcome back to Inside the Songs. Today I am talking to what I believe to be a very important person in the audio technology world. I'm going to let him introduce himself to you. Rok, please tell us who you are and what you do.
Basically, I'm a crazy lunatic, founder of an audio company, which means that, I have to fight kind of like the David and Goliath story over here. Being a small company starting out from Slovenia in the middle of Europe, we are just, on the edge of the Alps right there. And, fighting the global companies is a struggle, is a thing on its own. So I guess that kind of describes me in a professional manner the best, as a lunatic trying to fight with mega companies, I guess.
Well, the world needs more lunatics, I reckon. So you founded your company, which is called OLLO Audio, in 27, working out of your dad's garage. What was the driving force behind that decision? What made you want to do that? And were you trying to satisfy a specific gap in the market?
Well, but basically, I was working as a professional in the IT industry, and at the time it was getting quite frustrating and a lot of stress going on and so on. And I got twins. Firstborns, 2 boys, Oliver and Laura. Here's why OLLO exists. So OLLO is basically Oliver and Laura, because they prompted me to do these things and to go out of the comfort zone, basically. So yeah, when I got the little 2 boys, I was working on a record for my band at the time, and obviously I couldn't use monitors even, throughout the day, not just at night, because, little babies will sleep without a specific schedule. So on that note, I had to resort to using headphones. And I've quickly learned that the headphones came in all sorts of different shapes and forms, and they don't really sound neutral. There are some really good, of course, out there as well. But the more I dived into this, the more I saw the opportunity to make something for myself, primarily just as a side project, as a side hustle, for fun, basically. And as it turns out, a friend wanted a pair, and then another friend wanted a pair, and another friend wanted a pair. So eventually I quit my daily job and started working on this full time. And here we go. A decade later, 15,000 customers, and off we go, yeah.
That's awesome. So it almost started out as a hobby or a passion project, and then you realized that there was a need for it in the market, so you're able to full-time it, which is
the market
great.
Basically told me, so most of the stories happen that way. When you just play around, you try something, usually trying to solve some sort of a pain that you personally have. And being an engineer, I have actually 2 colleges, so I'm an engineer on one side, but I'm also an economist on the other side. So, joining these passions together made, a pretty nice bed to start a company in the audio industry, doing something in engineering and deploying all the, marketing and sales skills that I've also obtained.
So what were some of the biggest challenges in the early days that you faced, and how did you overcome those?
Well, the super early days, meaning the first 6 months after, quitting my daily job, is how to basically survive, paying the bills and for diapers and stuff. So that was kind of tricky, but I was really lucky in a way to have a local grant available. So I was able to apply for a government grant for 50K, which is, it's not much, but it's enough to get you through the first year of developing a product, developing a marketplace, testing things out, doing the prototyping batches, securing supply chain and so on. So without that, OLLO would not exist. So, hey, once in a lifetime thing, thank you, government, that actually made that, happen on a financial side of things. But after a year, I was quite successful at sales. It was enough to feed my family, basically.
That's great. And the EU is actually pretty good for having schemes, incentives for startups. I know here in Spain, I've benefited from a couple of grants that are there to support people going self-employed. And I know I wouldn't have been able to access those sorts of things had I still been in the UK, especially post Brexit. All that EU funding is done in the UK. So the EU is good for that kind of stuff. Your headphones are now used by engineers and artists all around the world. A couple of episodes ago, I was chatting with Mark Orzelli, the music producer. I know he's an ambassador for your brand. At what point did you realize that OLLO Audio was becoming a respected player in the audio industry?
Well, it kind of happens like 2 or 3 years into the story, with the very first ambassador calling us, reaching out, Chris Brown from the UK, and he was basically asking if we can create a headphone for him. And the idea was that he would like to have the sound at the time of the S4 model, which were fairly flat, put into a closed back version. So when we created that headphone for him and then eventually start selling that as a model, that was kind of like a moment where I went like, shit, like that's really cool engineer working with Robbie Williams, Natalie Imbruglia, so only like strong names, actually asking for, you know, a headphone from us. That kind of made the leap of faith, basically. Hey, we have something here, let's try to push it forward.
So the music tech market as a whole is pretty saturated. You know, there are a lot of companies, and in the headphone space as well, there's a massive range of models available from a cheaper pair of open backs like these Beyerdynamics through to much higher end models. So what are the biggest misconceptions that people have about pro audio headphones, if we're able to even define what pro audio means?
I mean, misconceptions. It's a really good question, actually. Maybe a bit difficult to answer it as in a factual manner. But the most important part of not just headphones, any monitoring, you know, it's at the end of the signal chain. It's like super important. That is what actually makes internal signals, digital signals, or whatever, you know, transduce them into air motion, and that's what you essentially hear. So it is like a really important part of the mixing cycle, producing and so on, enjoying music as well. So I think that the most critical thing about monitoring in general is that you accept the fact that different monitors will sound different, not in terms of models and size and placement and so on, but, you know, just the room acoustics, the philosophy, the frequency response behind designing a piece of gear that, you know, is used as a monitoring gear, or headphones as well. You know, do you need something portable like the HD25, which are super popular in broadcasting and for DJs and so on. But, you know, they are not really comfortable to have them for, you know, 6 hours. It's kind of like a design trade-off. What are you going to build as a company? And on the other side, you know, as a consumer, as a user, what are you actually looking for in a monitoring, you know, device, either headphones or speakers? Should it be portable? Then, of course, the price range. Then, of course, are you going to have a subwoofer? Then can you, you know, do you have to mix quietly without disturbing anyone? Like in my case, it was kids, could be neighbors, could be, you know, if you're in a student campus, if you're in a rented apartment, it's very unlikely that you're going to invest in any room treatment like you have behind you over there. So there's like a lot of things that goes into making a decision to get the right monitoring for you. And that's why I say it's impossible to answer a question like what are the misconceptions, because it really depends on the final user and the use case of, you know, a specific studio or producer or an artist. I guess that's as close as I can get to a truthful and honest answer about this.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And there are just so many variables in terms of having an ideal or a perfect monitoring experience, if we can even quantify that, because you can have the most neutral, the most hi-fi speakers in the world, but if they're in a room that isn't also flat, then they're still going to sound nasty. And again, the best speakers in the world, but if your D to A conversion isn't very nice, then you're still not going to be getting the best signal going into those speakers.
Exactly.
So there are just so many variables. And one of the biggest problems that people working in unprofessional locations, like working at home, complain about is, I do my mix at home sounds great, and then I take it anywhere else and it sounds like dog shit. And it will, because you're working in an environment that isn't being honest with you. And part of the work of a producer and a mixing and mastering engineer is learning how to make a mix that is going to translate the best across a multitude of different environments, whether it's playing it straight out of a mobile phone, or whether it's on earbuds or headphones or monitors or in a car or in a club. You will never optimize a mix to sound the best across all of those things, but you can make a mix that is going to sound good across all those things if you understand how to craft that. And that simply comes with experience and with trying things and with learning what will or will not work. It's a process, you know?
Yeah, it's kind of threefold, I think. So partially what you just mentioned are experience. Without that, you will not mix anything. Then secondly would be technology. Just do you have monitoring that you can trust? And thirdly would be kind of related to experience as well, but having a set of reference tracks. If you really have a nice set and you really know it, you can, make a decent mix anywhere. And you can try how it translates the reference tracks, how they translate, and then how your mix translates. And I've been working on a documentary last year. It's called The Rabbit Hole of Trusting Sound. You can find that on YouTube. And I've talked to, I don't really know, 15 or 20 A-level engineers, Grammy-winning engineers working with the biggest names in the industry. Just exploring and discovering what does it mean to trust in your monitor, to trust sound in general, and how to achieve the translation, as we call it, of a mix. And it boils down that it's really important to have a pair of headphones that you really trust, because those are room independent. You can work from any room. That's like super important. Then secondly, of course, you need to have enough experience. You cannot expect as a beginner to start mixing and deliver top-notch mixes. It just doesn't happen. Same as in the kitchen. If you want to make like the best pasta or best pizza or whatever, the first one you're going to make, it's not going to be great. And as mentioned before, having these reference tracks to kind of calibrate your ears, calibrate yourself, your mindset to what you're doing. And the biggest challenge that they all kind of mentioned is that they have to work in multiple genres over time. So you might be working in a bass heavy music, EDM or whatever for a month, and then you have a jazz record as a contrast. Your mindset and approach and the tools that you've been using for the past, month or two maybe, are completely different than what you actually need to deploy to finish that project. And even further down, many of these engineers do FOH as well, so front of house live events, which is, in a philosophy, it's the same thing, but it's a different approach, different tools, again, different mice and different ears. You have to calibrate again. So, jumping from mixing a record on headphones, then on speakers, then in a guest room, then a live event, and then different genres, it's like extremely difficult to be consistent. And that is the most important thing to be a true professional audio engineer in whatever field you are, to truly deliver consistent results so that you can build trust with your clients. And, headphones are just one part of that chain of events and things that have to be in place to achieve that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And as you're saying, I know my room here. I know what my monitors sound like. So I know that the mixes that I make in here, I can trust. But if I were to go and work in a different studio with different monitors, I don't know that what I'm doing is gonna feel the same. Whereas a pair of headphones will always sound like that same pair of headphones. They are translatable, so you can take them anywhere, any studio, any room in the world, and you can trust a pair of headphones. So you know that you can essentially sense check your mixing decisions on monitors and go, am I hearing things the way I think I'm hearing things? Which is why I believe a pair of headphones that is such a useful resource, because they are so transferable. On that note, what are the key factors that separate a great pair of mixing headphones from something that's just good? Why is it that I can get a pair of open backs like these for €200, $200, Whereas I've got like a pair of Headphone 2s from Head up there in Germany, and they cost like €2,000. What is the difference there?
Yeah.
Why is one priced so much more than the other?
Yeah, I'll have some fun with this. If you read business books and stuff like that, or if you follow, business coaches on Instagram and so on, eventually you'll hear this story. What are you actually buying? What do you actually need? So do you need a hole in the wall to hang a picture? Yeah, all right, so you're buying a hole. If you need one, you can have a basic drill that you get anywhere for $5, right? But if you're a professional hole driller, that drill is not going to last very long. So you're going to have a professional tool that will be more expensive. But what will be extremely important for you if you're like on the A-level game is the professional support provided by the company. So you can buy whatever, let's call it just, China-made product to drill holes. Or you can go with, I don't know, Bosch or Makita or whatever, which are extremely, professional brands. And what they will deliver to you is something like, did your machine stop working? Give us a call in 2 hours. We will be at, the construction site or whatever, and you will be able to continue working. So that is something that you cannot get for $20 from a local store. You got to buy something for $2,000 and a subscription model. And, it is expensive, but it's also a peace of mind. So in terms of professional audio, it's the same thing. If you're buying really cool and expensive, in a way, gear, obviously the delivery of the signals will be there, but also the support that comes with it. And that's, in my opinion, the biggest differentiator in terms of, am I buying headphones for $200, which if they break, hey, good luck? Or am I buying something for, $500, $1,000, and so on, where you will have the support of, exchanging any parts yourself, super fast shipping options. You will have a support person on the other side, not an AI-generated bot or whatever, but someone who will guide you in stereo. And you will have local representatives. You will have local distribution centers, local service centers. All of that will craft a completely different experience, which is a professional experience, in a contrast to, a good headphone for $150 to $100, no-name brand or whatever.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So yeah, sure, you expect the product to be better as well to a certain degree, but the components that go within a pair of headphones do not exponentially get better and better. There is a ceiling, but there isn't necessarily a ceiling in the service that you can get, which is, as you say, if you're a professional, that peace of mind. You need to know that if something goes tits up, you are able to get on the email and get a reply within 24 hours and get a solution. That's a really interesting perspective.
Yeah, so I was working with a really huge studio in Vienna. They have a place for 120 instrumentalists, orchestra basically. And all of them, of course, violins and stuff, they are quite low in volume acoustically in a really big studio. So all the gain staging and everything is quite hot. So it's important that the headphones that they are using are like really nice isolating, but at the same time comfortable enough and so on. And they need 120 pairs, right? If you have like 2 cables that are dead, it's really difficult to pull a job through. So it's a massive cost created by, a failed cable or a bunch of them in a set like that, which almost inevitably happen. 120 people with cables moving around, somebody's going to trip over something, somebody's going to do something that will hurt the signal chain in one way or another. And for this kind of scenarios, it's like super important when you have like this pro-level professional support, which means, hey, you call me now, and if it's necessary, the local representative will bring another unit, another cable, another speaker, whatever is necessary in a matter of hours to the set. Of course, you have replacement and spare kits available, but sometimes when you're fully booked, you're at the absolute limit, and it could be a decision: do we take this job or not? What are the risks involved? Having professional gear, not just headphones, anything you have in the studio. If you can rely on the support from these companies, then you can push forward a lot quicker, a lot more consistent, with a lot more trust and self-confidence. And that is what makes the difference between like these really huge studios that make, blockbuster movies and stuff versus, a local guy working from a small studio. That is the difference. And the clients are relying that a big facility studio will have all of these things in place to make sure that the project will move accordingly to schedule. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it does. It does completely. I couldn't agree more. So we've mentioned quite a lot of positives about headphones and their reliability and stuff. What about the flip side of that? What are some of the challenges that engineers face when mixing on headphones as opposed to monitors?
That's actually a question for you a little bit more than for me, You have like a nice, I can see on your screen over there that you have like a 360 audio going on. Do you have a Dolby setup or Sony?
Yeah, I'm Dolby Atmos authorized. I'm full Dolby in here. Okay, I'll take the question then if you're throwing it back to me.
I do.
So in my opinion, mixing is about, as I mentioned before, translatable experiences. You need to consider the range of ways in which someone will listen to a song once it's released. There is a large proportion of people that will listen on earbuds or over-ear headphones. So if you're not including that in your mixing process and in your decision-making process, then you're not considering a large proportion of the target audience, which to me is foolish. Likewise, if you don't check your mix in a car, which everybody knows the world over is the acid test for mixing, does it sound any good in a car? You're, again, not considering a large percentage of your target audience, because lots of people will listen to music whilst they're on a journey. Not many people, comparably to the other proportions of people, will go and sit in a beautifully treated room like this on an expensive pair of monitors and listen to your mix. So yeah, okay, this is where my benchmark is set and I want it to sound amazing in here, but this is not the experience that matters ultimately. So I guess what I'm saying is the challenge of mixing on a pair of headphones is to actually make sure that I am prioritizing it in my process, because when I sit here in the room and I've got lots of air moving because the powerful monitors are, creating lots of energy in the room, that's a real rush, and the subwoofers are making the floor rumble, and, that's a really emotive experience. You put on a pair of headphones, it doesn't feel the same. It's a much closer, much more intimate experience. And I will find often that the detail that I hear in a pair of headphones is better than the details that I notice out of monitors, not because I can't hear it out of the monitors, because I can, but because it's much closer to my head, to my ears. The experience that I get is much more intimate versus all that rushing air and movement. And that's a challenge, to weigh up all those things and make sure that you're considering all those different parts of the experience and considering where the song is going to end up. It's different to if you're mixing club music and that the primary place you're trying to get that is into the clubs, in London or in Ibiza or wherever. If you're aiming for that, then that is a different scenario when you're finishing a record. So I guess that's part of it. Let's talk about some common issues with headphones. We know that common issues with speakers and with rooms are all about neutrality of frequencies and making sure that you can trust your environment and stuff. Similar things apply to headphones. Every pair of headphones has its own frequency curve, has its own response. How can we deal with those common inconsistencies, like different frequency responses, like stereo imaging, like ear fatigue that you get from headphones? What can we do with those things?
Well, the most important parameter in monitoring for mixing decisions is without a doubt the frequency response. That's the most important parameter. It's not the only one, but it's the most important, because if you have dips and peaks trying to fool you, of course you will have difficult times making a record, making it sound balanced. So as you probably know, the physics are the same in terms of, how air moves and how sound travels with speakers or with headphones. And the important one in headphones, for example, is the masking effect. Same for speakers, basically, right? So the masking effect kicks in, fully blown at 6 dB difference, but it starts to creep in at 3 dB. So if you have a headphone that is, for example, 3 dB strong 80 hertz, than it is at 160 hertz, you're getting a little bit of masking already. If you're getting to 5 dB, 6 dB, then the 160 is something that your ears will just not pick up anymore. It's just going to be a harmonic component to the sound. You're not going to hear the fundamental anymore, which means it's really difficult to mix the kick drum and bass relationship, to mix, just the volume of bass in a song, really difficult. And then to make that translate, even more difficult, because the 80 hertz is something that many systems will not even play back, while the 160, everything will play back, well, mostly. And the 160, 200 hertz, that's, the low mids. They are like so nasty, so muddy. If you get them wrong for 2 dB, the whole mix will collapse. So it's like a very delicate area. And now imagine you're having a headphone with a frequency response that is slightly boosting the low end, which many headphones does. And then you have 160, 200 hertz, which are like 4 dB, 5 dB, 6 dB lower in the fundamental frequency. Now that completely starts masking that. You will not be able to mix on it. Just, you can guess, you can learn it up to a point, but it's just physically impossible because of the sound waves. The stronger ones are just gonna eat up the smaller ones, and you're essentially not hearing those anymore. So for example, a closed back headphone, I'm not just gonna say the name of the brand because they are a fantastic brand, but having a little bit of bass and then a resonance at 200 or 300 hertz will create that masking effect without a doubt. But at the same time, it's really nice to listen to those. You put through, like a bass or vocals, and they just sound crisp and clear because it's like remixing in a way with the frequency response of the headphone.
Yeah, it's a challenge, and therefore to combat that, I suppose lots of companies are doing stuff. I say lots. There are companies that are doing headphone calibration. I know, for example, all of your headphones come with calibration software. There are companies like SonarWorks who do speaker and headphone calibration. Slate Digital have their VSX headphones that come with different room modeling calibrations. I think Waves have something of their own. I don't know much about it.
Yeah.
So companies are doing it now. Do you think that is going to become a standard feature across the industry where products just come with calibration, or do you think that people will still value the art of learning a pair of headphones, learning a pair of speakers, and learning an environment?
Well, you will always have to learning, but on the flip side, yeah, of course, I really want that to happen. Although, yeah, we are one of the very few companies that does that on a super high level. The calibration that we provide is further developed than any of the companies that you mentioned. But think of it like this. Will headphone companies provide calibration for their professional models going forward? I think they all will eventually. It's the same as with speakers. Years back, Genelec started doing their thing where they will ship you the speakers and the whole thing for calibrating. Then obviously, whatever room you're going to set up, when you're placing, absorbers and diffusion and so on, you're doing measurements, you're calibrating. So there's basically 0 studio environments on the planet that are not calibrated. So, the question, are we going to calibrate headphones, is just it's even weird that it took us so long to start calibrating headphones. Because in a way, it's, maybe even a bit easier to calibrate a headphone than it is to calibrate a room. Just due to the fact that in a room you will be moving around in the acoustical chamber, And, standing waves will be at different locations. Your sweet spot will be in a different location, or maybe just one, maybe you'll have two in the studio. But with headphones, the acoustic properties travel with you. So they are basically the same. You only need to crack one frequency response, one calibration, to get to a true flat sound. So that's my take on it. I think that other companies will dive into this as well. We've seen that with Sennheiser, with the 490s, getting there with the DRVR partnership. So I'm VSX as well. So Steven is doing this as a bundle. So it's similar to our offer. We're doing that with Real Phones. So they've been kind enough to lend us their software, their engine, and all the skills required to create the software that works with our calibration system. So there's a misconception. Some people think that when we say calibrated and we are using Real Phones, that it's a Real Phones calibration. It's not. So it's individually calibrated here in the factory, every single unit, and that file, that calibration is deployed within the software from Real Phones. On a side note, it also works with the Waves NX calibration system and room emulations. And the fun fact about our calibration, which is something that no one else does, at least for now, is that it's open source, it's open data. You can actually see the exact values for your unit, exact EQ nodes, and you can take those out of the calibration file into whatever EQ you're using. If you like the FET filter, go with that. Save it as a preset, ready to go. If you're using analog gear, you can do that as well. And ideally, our recommendation would always be to have the calibration on the headphones output only. So you would need a DSP-enabled interface so that the calibration would be directly on the output of the headphones. So that your speakers will have a different calibration and you can, move between those super easily. And they're both calibrated. Of course, the calibration is different, so you need a separate channel for that purpose alone. And we would always recommend that way. The side problem would be that you cannot deploy a plugin for that if you have it like on a card, usually, unless your card will support VST plugins as well.
That's really interesting. So I want to talk to you about innovation in the pro audio space right now. What do you see, or where do you see the biggest opportunities for innovation? What insights have you got for me at the moment?
Well, as an audio industry in general, I don't really think I can speak about it. What I've learned in the past decade is that when you try to be at the very top of a niche market, of a niche product, of a specialized product, it gets really complicated really, really fast. And it's impossible to keep tabs on the audio industry in general. Even, saying pro audio industry, which is a niche down version, it's still so huge and so complex, it's impossible to really know what's going on and what are the advances possible. But for us, from our point of view, in terms of headphones, we are dealing a lot, and really a lot, with material science. Because it is an acoustical chamber, it is very small acoustical chamber, and the flow resistance, which is, basically acoustic design of the headphone, is like very dependent on the materials and their tolerances. And that is the biggest challenge for us. So in terms of designing a headphone from the materials that you can source consistently, in terms of, earpads, for example, what's the density of those? It will dramatically change and shift anything below 1 kilohertz, in terms of like 2 or 3 dB up or down. So the balance between the highs and the lows can dramatically change, completely flipping off the overall balance of the headphone just by, having a different supplier and, well, hell, from the same supplier, just a different batch of earpads will might be, slightly different response. So that is something that I think we have to innovate on in terms of using AI tools, simulations, whatever possible, to design the acoustical chamber with materials that will have as minimal tolerances as possible, from the get-go, from the design board. And then, of course, eventually transfers down to the, supply chain. That, in my opinion, is extremely important in order to deliver better consistency with our products in the future. And I think that goes for all headphone companies.
Yeah, and it goes, that topic of conversation goes beyond headphones as well, because you hear about people swearing by a particular compressor model from the whatever, I love the 1176, the original Blue Stripe, because, of the way that the mid-range sounds, that people swear by specific things. You even hear about cones for guitar cabs and a specific batch number being like, that batch just sounds incredible. And so even within products that were supposedly made exactly the same, like identical process, there are physical, mechanical differences.
Yes.
Which is why some physical products are so highly sought after and so expensive, like an original Fairchild or whatever. And as you say, finding a way to make the process consistent and eliminate those variables is going to enable people to produce stuff more consistently, which I think must be a good thing ultimately. I'd like to ask you about, there's a debate around Harman target tuning versus flat response. First of all, tell us what Harman target tuning is for those that don't know, and what is this debate about?
Well, basically, Harman is a mega corporation. They own GPL, AKG, and so on. I believe they're partnered with Samsung as well. So it's like a mega conglomerate. And they have a really nice research lab led by Dr. Shan Olive. And he's been working on that, on what is flat, on Harman target curve for basically his entire career. The way their approach is, they said, hey, let's put some people together in a room. And let's make that room sound really well. And when we have a room that, all the test subjects will agree it sounds great, we're going to capture that room response in different ways. And one of the ways was, placing an ear simulator in front of those speakers and capturing that ideal room. And then that gives you a reference point, because you've now captured a great room with the ear simulator. So if you replace the room with the headphones on that same ear simulator, and if you read the results, of course, you can see, the deviations between, whatever headphones you put on that device, and the device is now listening to headphone, versus the results that you have, from previous measurement where the ear simulator was, capturing a room. So that's basically the philosophy that they took, and they've been perfecting it over time. The results showed that the majority of people enjoy about 5 dB extra bass boost below 100 hertz, and maybe a little bit more on the 3 to 5K area. And they've come up with this, they call it now, of course, the Harman target curve, which is their proposal for the new flat standard that should be used, basically anywhere. But over time, professional engineers started to, more and more comment that it might not be ideal for professional work. It sounds great, it's enjoyable, but when you're really mixing stuff, maybe the extra bass is, just masking too much. It's just too overpowering. It creates too much, emotions in a way, and you're not really thinking clear and making the best decisions. So on that note, we've learned that it would be better to design a headphone that is in a traditional flat, which would be so-called diffuse field target, which was developed in a different way in a lab without human subjects, which is basically a fully reverberant room with infinite reflections. And it put a speaker in there, and it tried to capture the response of that, again, ear simulator in that room. And then you place that ear simulator together or couple it with, a headphone, and then you can see how much away from that target curve your headphones are. So that would be the diffuse field. And what we came up here at OLLO is that let's kind of join these two together. And we went to a Synchron Stage, a really nice studio, which is a Dolby certified studio, was recently certified about a month before we did the measurements. We captured that with a camera device, which is a really good ear simulator, the full head and torso. And we took those reference measurements of that ideal Dolby Atmos room, took it to the lab, put on that same ear simulator our headphones, and we just, show how far away we are from that room. We tuned the headphones to match that, but then we did A/B testing with human subjects as well. So their results were then weighted upon the target from Dolby in that case. So we came up with a target that works in a headphone scenario, which is slightly different than speaker scenario. As you mentioned earlier, when you have speakers, you feel them in your chest. There's like some vibration going on. It's a lot more visceral than just headphones. So in order to make sure that, the mixing environment translates into a headphone, that you can actually trust your mixing decisions there, we had to deploy human subjects testing as well, alongside just pure science and capturing things. And we meshed that together into a target curve for all of it you get with the X1 headphones, and we calibrate against that target curve down to 1 dB tolerances, which is, insane.
Yeah, that's really interesting, really interesting. And you've mentioned Dolby Atmos in that response there. Obviously, I work with Dolby here. There are other immersive formats around on the market as well, but Dolby is the most known. How do you see headphone technology evolving to meet the needs of those demands with stuff like the improvements in binaural monitoring and head tracking technology and those sorts of things?
Well, I think that on the consumer side, there will be a lot of advance in this way. There are massive budgets and massive labs. Meta, Facebook, they have an incredible audio lab, same as Apple does, and Microsoft, and so on. So they are pushing these boundaries on one side, but then we have Sony on the other side, which is a massive player, also in theaters for movies and so on. So they again are pushing this, to the absolute limits. It's a game between, software developers on one side, then we have the hardware developers on the other side, and then we have the content developers. So it's like a triangle, like a pyramid, and all of these are in complete relationship. The creators will do something when the technology will enable it. But, you need to have both kind of like the software part, the hardware part, and the creators, which are, of course, all of these are serving the final user. And sometimes we see that the consumers don't fully jump on board with new technologies. That happened in the 90s with the surround sound, which is basically very similar to Atmos. To be honest, it's like super same thing. But, no one really jumped on it. There was a lot of home theater sold, but the installation was complex, moving cables around. Then buying DVDs that would support 5.1 or whatever you've had set up. So there was just, too much friction. Now with Dolby and Sony as well, but the friction is getting less and less when you just use, AirPods and, you have the software capability already in your phone. The delivery service by, streaming services is there. They can stream surround sound or, 360 immersive or whatever files, and your phone can, render that into full object placements and movements and so on. And the good thing or the difference between the standard surround versus the Atmos, which is, I know you know that, is that it is object-based. It's not channel-based, so it's not really important how many channels you have. The renderer will do its magic to try and place the virtually positioned object in the best speaker that you have around you, or virtualize it down into a binaural version for headphones. So I think the next step that all of these labs are pushing is tracking down the code of the HRTFs, the personalized audio. So in order to achieve great translation in a headphone binauralized version, you would need to have, or it would be nice to have the inputs from the person in terms of their HRTFs, which just means, how their ears are picking up sound, where are the resonances of their ears. And you need to have that in order to provide a really good 360 virtualized experience. I can dive really deep into this, but I think it will be just too complex. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I think just to piggyback on that a little bit, as you say, the reason that surround sound didn't take off massively with 5171 was because of the expense, effectively, to the consumer. It was never affordable to the majority of consumers, and it was therefore always, a niche thing, really, for those that could afford that. The difference with immersive formats Dolby, for example, is that there is a consideration of the end user in mind. There is a consideration of making it accessible to the masses through its ability to adapt to a pair of earbuds or headphones. The thing that will really clinch it is where it works effectively on any pair of headphones or earbuds, when it works effectively in a car, and when it works effectively out of any TV at home, regardless of whether you have, a Sonos Atmos rig or whatever else. When those three things are really nailed, then it's not even a consideration for the end user. Then you just use Atmos because it's just there and it's better.
And it's better, yeah.
But at the moment, it's not quite there. So it's still, it's still a bit niche, but way less so than surround formats.
I think it's the same thing as with, the lossless audio or like super high fidelity audio in streaming services. Do consumers really think about it anymore? It's just, set to auto. So, whenever you have a good signal, you're going to get the best possible, stream that your device can take. And I think it's the same with Dolby. Eventually or whatever, immersive format. Maybe someday we'll have like a uniform format. But for now, it's still Dolby and Sony 360 and Aura 3D. But, the thing is, which is great about Dolby and Sony as well, is that you don't have to think about the delivery. It's just a streaming of, and it's rendered at the device, which means there is really no friction. You don't really have to choose a different file. It's not like you have two CDs. One is, surround immersive and the other one is a stereo file. It doesn't matter. It's one file and it will just fold down to whatever you have. It could be like a single speaker on a tele and it's going to work. And so the frictionless process is already there. I think that the creative community needs to adapt it a little bit more, maybe. And on the other side, as mentioned before, in the pyramid, the software companies, the streaming providers need to find a way how to effectively stream that through Android phones, through iPhones, and so on, and eventually through, car systems and theater systems and so on. So it's about channeling all this data to the final device that today, 9 out of 10 is capable of, rendering that sort of a file. So it's a software issue more than it is a hardware issue at the moment. At least that's my take on it. And I think that consumers don't really, think about it. They're not actively searching for Dolby mixes unless you're a mixing engineer and you're enjoying that. So I think it's going into the right direction, and eventually we will just want to listen in binauralized version because it sounds better, even though if it's just stereo. Now, even if you're, as a mixing engineer, if you're approaching Dolby, as in, I'll just place things like they're in a stereo image, it will still sound better because the reverberation tails and so on will just render a lot better in a full 360 virtualized renderer than they do with just, having two speakers, especially when they are, attached to your head. You would need to virtually make this feeling of a room by deploying, basic tricks for the stereo file that are already there in a immersive, mixing environment.
Yeah, I agree. There is a significant challenge still from the production perspective, because at the moment, you're still required to submit both the stereo file and the ADM BWF file to your distributors. And whilst you still have to create those two files to distribute, there's always going to be friction from a production perspective because you're effectively having to do the work twice. You have to do a stereo mix and then you have to do an Atmos mix. And that's why people like Mark Orzelli, who I spoke to previously, he's not on the Atmos bus because of that. His reasons were deeper, but that was a big no-no for him, which I totally understand. When it gets to the point for producers where we can just make an Atmos mix and not have to consider stereo because Atmos is what goes out, that's when, the whole production world will shift to it, but not before that. But we have to be at the stage first where all of the end users are able to receive the Atmos first, because you can't be in a situation where they can only listen if they're on an Atmos-enabled device. That the user experience has to be the standard before the production experience can adapt to be the new standard.
Yeah, that's what I meant before when I said, the software companies need to figure this one out. We should, distribute immersive format, which should be kind of agreed, and it should be universal, like, we have with Slack or we have with WAV or whatever, it works anywhere. So the same thing needs to happen with, Dolby and Sony files, and we would distribute those, and then the streaming service, in case you only have a stereo device, would already stream you just the stereo down mixed version of the file, and that should be rendered on the service itself. That will create frictionless transition. Maybe I'm not familiar enough with what goes into the software. Of course I'm not. But I think that eventually these companies will need to innovate on that front and just to deliver whatever the final user wants, which is a song in whatever format they have, without considering, do I have the Dolby Atmos enabled on my phone? Am I paying the right subscription or whatever? I think that's the important part. And truly, I've talked to Dolby a few times, and they are really, really trying to push that further down, not just in terms of the technology, but in terms of the delivery systems, because that is their bottleneck at the moment.
Yeah. And they have actually just this week or end of last week, they've just released their own mobile app, which allows people to share Atmos mixes for end users to be able to listen to without it needing to be distributed properly. The mistake I believe they've made is it's quite an expensive subscription model. So they want like $30 a month for it, which I think is a pity. But the premise is good. They're trying to make it easier for people to demonstrate their Atmos work, which is good. But that's a whole different thing. So last question from me is advice for someone looking to invest in high quality monitoring headphones for the first time. There's obviously a lot of options out there. What should people be considering? Obviously beyond their budget, they have to know how much they've got to spend, how much they want to spend, but beyond budget, what should they be thinking about?
Well, in terms of, we can circle back to the beginning of the episode when we were talking about, what does it mean to buy a professional drill to make a hole in the wall for your pictures? I think it starts with that. Are you buying something as a hobby, as a side thing, just for fun? Or are you buying a piece of gear that you're collecting to eventually build up an arsenal of professional gear that you're going to use, in your career development? So that is, I think, extremely important. And we all make these mistakes. I did it, not just with audio gear, with buying tools for the factory. The same thing. I'm just going to buy, a cheap 3D printer because we need it, And then half a year later, I need to buy a better one. And then 5 years later, I need to buy a professional machine. Spending so much time and money and the learning curves and so on. Rather, I would be thinking, on day one and say, hey, the technology is going this way. The way we're making headphones, we will need to have, a 3D printer that is capable of X, Y, and Z. And should invest in that at some point. Maybe I would need to save and rent it for a while, but that's like a development path for investing into bringing whatever facility you want to life. So if you're buying something for a hobby, buy whatever you want with whatever budget you have. Just consider that you can get something that is fairly flat. You can even trust, the generic public opinion. So if you go and search around, you're going to get different lists of best studio headphones. Whatever you're going to buy from that list, it's not going to be completely terrible, right? So as a beginner, you will probably get away with it. If you are buying something that you want to build upon, another guitar, another amp, to eventually have a signal chain that is all made of professional gear, then when you're buying headphones, just wait if you don't have the money and buy something that is like really, really good in terms of, the specs, but as well as have a professional support for you. So when something breaks, you can replace it and it's not too expensive. When you need support, you can get somebody to talk to you, not just an automated generic bot. So I think those kind of decisions are important. when you're trying to select, the headphones for you. That would be my take and my experience. I've fucked this up so many times, not just in audio, not just in studio life, in my professional life as a manufacturer. I bought so many things that, I thought was, good enough for now, but eventually I'm ending up with, a dumpster with, full of all sorts of electronic stuff and tools and things and software. I've bought so many different licenses that I never use because I didn't think things through. So that would be my advice. Think it through. If you're looking for something that will last you a long time, that will have a nice warranty and so on, and is calibrated, then I think the OLLO, of course I'm biased, but I think the OLLO is definitely one of the best choices you can go with. But if you're looking for something super exclusive, then you'll have to go into 2,000, 3,000 euros investment. And if you're looking for something to just work and not think about it, then, 10 best headphones, Google it, press enter, and whatever you're going to get there, it's probably going to work well enough for you.
Yeah, that's great advice. Every studio around the world has some piece of equipment, some piece of kit that was bought thinking we've got to have one of those, we'll need that, and has never been used.
Yeah.
Myself included, probably. But there we go. It's all part of the experience. Rok, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise. It's been a joy.
Thank you very much.